So Rupert, I would like to clarify what I've been, in my culture, talk about fate.
Fate?
Fate, free will versus fate. So, free will, you explained, at least I understood very beautifully yesterday, the moment when you feel I'm angry, I have a choice to go and say, who is the I? The Vedantic part, or go towards the anger and experience the Tantric part. So, to that extent, I'm going to bring in King Lear and John Smith. So, so now coming to fate and taking the metaphor of King Lear and John Smith. Infinite consciousness localizes as John Smith. And if John Smith came to one of your conferences, maybe, he would understand free will, but...
John Smith is consciousness.
Sorry, consciousness.
Localizes it as King Lear. Yeah.
King Lear. So localizes as King Lear. And if King Lear understood Vedantic and Tantric, he might, exercise free will. But can King Lear be anything else other than King Lear?
The only
King Lear change to be Hamlet, or is he fated to be King Lear?
King Lear has to play his part. But the only escape, if we can call it an escape from King Lear, is to know himself as John Smith, or rather, for the knowledge I am John Smith, to shine through the character of King Lear. But he cannot change being King Lear. He cannot become Hamlet. Hamlet's already got that part. It's already taken. Who was it? There's a famous 20th century, famous composer, I can't remember who it was, Scriabin or someone like that. Someone stopped him in the street and said, excuse me, are you Mr. Scriabin? He said, yes, somebody had to be.
But why does infinite consciousness localize one way in me and another way in someone else? That's particularly that.
Well, they couldn't be.
If that somebody else is less fortunate and has lost something, and
but consciousness couldn't localize itself simultaneously as two identical people. Otherwise, both peoples would have to occupy the space that you occupy. It can't be the same person. It has to be different. It can't be two people exactly like you. There's only room for one of you in the space you are occupying.
Yes, but let me perhaps use a different example. I've been trying to avoid that, because why localize as me and localize as money, for example? As money, who's here?
As money.
Well, because when I was young, whenever I used to ask that question, there was always, well, it is to show you or show me how fortunate and grateful I was that I had this fate and the other one didn't. So it just always bothers me, this question of fate, that somehow the model of infinite consciousness localizing one way in a more quote-unquote fortunate person and in a less fortunate way in another person. But I understand fortunate is something viewed from the outside, and it may feel very different from the inside of the less fortunate person. But it's just, what is this thing called fate then in the context of what you're talking about?
I don't know why it is that two people born of the same parents at the same time, or much the same time, brought up in the same way, educated in the same way, with all the same opportunities, same amount of love, same amount of care, same amount of education, what it is that makes one of them deeply interested in these matters and one of them not. I don't know why that is. Of course, you can build a model of past lives in which the fruit of their actions now depend upon the activities that they both engaged in, thoughts, feelings, activities and relationships in past lives. But I'm a little reluctant to go down that path because of the suggestion that someone that suffers greatly in this life or doesn't come across a path such as this is somehow paying for something they did wrong or some failure in a previous life. And I don't like that model, so I'm very reluctant to go down the traditional route of reincarnation. At the same time, as you know from previous conversations, I think that what we are localizations of mind, and that those that are our minds, as they delocalize, they don't completely dissolve in consciousness. They may remain in some kind of realm and coalesce together downstream. So I think there is also intelligence to the idea that a mind outlives the residual energies in a mind as it unravels, outlives the disintegration of the body. But I'm reluctant to go too far in that direction to explain why some people suffer so much in this life. I prefer just to say I don't know. After all, everyone here has a deep, not just an interest, but a deep love of the truth. Does anyone here feel that they earned their love of truth? That their love of truth was somehow a reward for something that you did? I don't feel that. I just found myself with this childish and devotional feeling towards God as a 6-year-old boy, which later on in my teens began to develop into a more focused search for truth. But that was just the way I found myself. I didn't do anything. I didn't merit it. I just found myself with this tremendous interest and love in these matters.
I just refuse to accept the theory that a benevolent, kind, loving, infinite consciousness would localize in someone less fortunate to show me how fortunate I am. I just think that's a rubbish theory.
Someone is not less fortunate in order to show you something.
Right.
That is not the purpose, the reason for. But you have I don't know you well, but I have no doubt that you have a kind and loving mind, and yet your mind is capable of assuming the form of a nightmare in your night dreams. Mm. And the characters in your nightmare do terrible things. How come? They are all made of your kind and loving mind. Well, God's mind could be essentially good, essentially loving. But as it overlooks itself and localizes itself, limits itself as a separate person, it overlooks at the same time the knowledge of its own peace, the knowledge of its own love, the knowledge of its own absence of separation. And this is why it is possible that a localization of consciousness, although made only of infinite consciousness, made of peace and happiness itself, is able to behave in a way that is unkind and unjust, even though it is still made out of God's loving mind. Exactly the same reason that the characters in your nightmare do terrible things, although they are made out of your kind and loving mind.
And why? Because that's the way I go inwards towards the bigger loving self. Is that the purpose?
I haven't understood you. Is that the?
So
is what the purpose?
God localizing and then putting perhaps not just these horrible thoughts, but also horrible dreams, but also going towards the separate self of anger and fear and so on, and trying to get away and come towards me. Is that
we can't say that is the
purpose?
It's God's purpose, because God wouldn't have created you we're using simplistic traditional language now. God wouldn't have created you in the first place if He wanted to keep you at home in Himself. He didn't create you in order to have you return to Him. He wouldn't have created you in the first place if He wanted to keep you at home. So there is the best way I can explain it is this: is that consciousness's nature is not just at rest. Consciousness has two natural modes. One is at rest, and the other is in movement. So when consciousness is at rest, there is no manifestation, no impulse to manifest its potential in form. But it is equally natural to consciousness to manifest its infinite potential in form. And we are all the agency through which consciousness manifests itself in form. So there is this impulse in consciousness to localize itself, and through this localization, know itself in form. But this manifestation, it comes at a price. Just as in order to have a dream, you have to forget your own mind. Your mind has to forget itself. That is the price you pay for going sunbathing on a Caribbean beach tonight. If you want to go sunbathing on a Caribbean beach tonight, you have to forget that you are asleep in garrison. That's the price you pay, the forgetting of your own mind. And you don't know what will happen on the Caribbean beach. You might have a lovely holiday, but you may have a miserable holiday. And the price you pay for that misery is the forgetting of the peace of your own mind asleep in garrison. It's the same. The price consciousness pays for manifestation is its peace. It consents, consciousness freely consents to give up the knowing of its own being, the knowing of its own infinite being, in order to know something finite. Consciousness cannot simultaneously know its own infinite being and at the same time assume the form of a localized person and know finite experience. So consciousness, as it were, consents to overlook itself, to forget itself, to localize itself, and therefore apparently limit itself. And in overlooking itself, it overlooks its innate peace. That's the price it pays for manifestation. Now, this localized consciousness, that's all of us, doesn't know that it is simply an activity in God's mind. It thinks that it is an entity unto itself. It thinks that its consciousness lives in the brain. So it feels, I am a fragment. I am separate. I am incomplete. I am vulnerable. And these are the two guiding feelings that determine the activities and relationships of the separate self. I am vulnerable. I need to protect myself. I am incomplete or I am a fragment, I need to fulfill myself. And that's what all separate selves are doing. Defending themselves, resisting, or seeking, trying to fulfill themselves, but trying to put an end to the sense of separation. So this is why individual people can behave in ways that are not consistent with love and justice and understanding, although the stuff they are made out of is inherently loving, inherently good, inherently peaceful. They can behave in ways that are not loving, that are not just, that are not good, although they are made out of that which is just and loving and good, because they are a limitation of that. And this limitation feels cut off from that, and that's what enables us to behave in ways that are unkind and unjust. Well, so this is one of the most profound questions in theology. How can a God who is all good, all knowing, all loving, how can there be room for evil or cruelty or unkindness in God's creation if God is all good? And this is I feel it's the best explanation for it. It doesn't deny the fact that God is all good, all loving, all knowing, all present, all powerful, but it explains in that context how it is still possible for an apparent individual to behave in ways that are not consistent with its essential nature.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.